yourself Lena?
I did.
Okay. And we have now 3 year-round, not full-time, but year-round employees. So Lena is in the archives, Andy is our community engagement director, and of course Jennifer Murish, who's been our longtime executive director. So that's a big step for us to have 3 full or year-round employees. So the board thought about that a long time, but went ahead and passed it. So it's a good thing. I am Mary Beth Lowe, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon, my son, Nate Lowe. He's our oldest son. Nate loves history and recently put together a detailed history of the Lowe family going back to 1066. Wow, 1066. He loves to go on the computer and look up all this information. He put together this history in this book that went out to many family members. Nate enjoys hunting, fishing, and traveling. He has 1 dog, Rosie, who's a boxer mix. Wow, that dog is huge. It'll raise up. It'll be about eye level with you. I can't watch that dog. She's too much for me. Nate became a Mason in 2009. He was Master of Rob Morris Lodge from 2020 to 2022. Nate's father is a Mason. He's right in the back there. His grandfather was a Mason. His great-grandfather was a Mason. And his great-great-grandfather was a Mason. And over here, you see a picture of Nate's great-great-grandfather, John G. Lowe. The story of John G. Lowe is in this book that recently came out with the Buffalo County Historical Society. John G. Lowe came over here from England, Liverpool, England, and this book is awesome. You'll see many Buffalo County residents who have history in this book. Maybe yours is in here too. This book is for $25. If you're a member, you get 20% off. But if you pay with a credit card, Jen tells me it's $27.50. Not a member yet? Sign up today. Memberships are open to everyone and the benefits start immediately. So it's a great book. If you'd like to peruse this book, you are certainly welcome to. So in this particular picture of John G. Lowe, he is featured in the Knights Templar garb, okay, part of the Yorkite branch of the Masonic Lodge. That's quite an interesting outfit. I don't think I've ever seen it today recently, but it's quite an old one. Nate originally put together this presentation with the history of Rob Morris Lodge number 46 for their 150th anniversary, which was in 2024. So please join me in welcoming Nate Lowe.
Can everybody hear me all right? I'm going to pass this around. There's a list in here of all the past masters of Rob Morris Lodge, and if it makes its way around the crowd, people can check for any names they might know, and they might find it interesting. So if anyone already suspects that this presentation may smack a little bit of nepotism, that's going to get worse. Between Dr. Ty, who oftentimes gives these presentations, and myself, we're related to about half of the presentation, so just buckle in. There was once a time when most residents of Buffalo County would not need a large introduction to Freemasonry. However, I think it's necessary to give some context in order to effectively tell the history of local Masonry. So what is Masonry? Masonry is first and foremost a fraternal organization of like-minded men. Any Mason worth his salt will happily and proudly tell you he is a Mason. When asked, Masons perform cornerstone ceremonies that reaffirm our involvement in the community. We stress that morality and service are the cornerstone of all societies. The Shriners, who must all be Masons before joining the shrine, participate in community events and parade their membership proudly. Masons are directed to support the common good, particularly in the forms of public service and education. We are also directed to take care of each other. We call each other brothers for a reason. Masonry predates the idea of a mission statement. However, if we had one, it would be stated as making good men better. The image sometimes used is one of turning good stone into a building block, or someone who is more useful to himself and society. We do not accept every applicant, because a foundation built of already cracked or weak stone will inevitably crumble and fail. The idea here is good, never perfect. Masons are told to seek perfection in their imperfect human lives, knowing they will never achieve it, but bettering themselves in the attempt. Some things Masonry is not. Masonry is not a secret society. It is a society that has some secrets that are reserved for its membership only. Our membership is, and always has been, public. Our elected officers were once published in the Kearney Hub. Masonry is not a religion, and is never considered a substitute for it. Those wishing to join Freemasonry are asked if they believe in a higher power. Any benevolent higher power may be accepted, even karma or Mother Nature. While Freemasonry is most common amongst Christians, many Masons hold Jewish, Muslim, or other faiths. Freemasonry does not ally itself with any particular political party or organization, although most Masons consider themselves patriots. George Washington was particularly active in Masonry and did much to grow the popularity of the institution in these, then new, United States. Masonry is not a conspiracy. We are directed to improve the world according to our own best judgment, not from some overriding directive. Most fictional depictions of the organization are just that, fictional. The origins of Freemasonry. AF and AM often appears after Masonic organizations in the state of Nebraska. That stands for Ancient, Free, and Accepted Masons. Masons that claim the title of ancient can show a direct chain of descent and legitimacy from the origins of the fraternal or speculative branch of Freemasonry that began when the Grand Lodge of England was formed in London in 1717. Although some speculative or fraternal forms of Freemasonry may have existed before that, it's a good concrete date to put in the sand. This is one of the first concrete events for Masonry as a purely fraternal organization. Many pieces of circumstantial evidence exist that point to Masonry's links to the craft guild system and patronage system that existed during the Middle Ages and Tudor periods of English history. However, it may never be proven where links between these operative and practical trade organizations and this first Grand Lodge formed in England lay. Freemasonry has been active in the United States from the start, and it is a credit to the fraternity that so many of these patriots were Masons. Some have even observed that as membership in Masonry has declined, so has the quality of the nation's civic morality and sense of political cordiality. Some terms to know. Degrees. In Masonry, as you advance in knowledge, you receive new degrees. These are 2 parts education and 1 part initiation. They are intended to both inform and direct the character and knowledge of new members. Worshipful Master. The Worshipful Master is the person in charge of a given lodge for a given year. He is simply the first among equals and directs the work of the craft to perform their duties for the given year. He directs the other lodge officers and forms committees to do the tasks set before the lodge. Worshipful refers to the reverence that he must show the Masonic work, his duties to the craft, and his duties to his creator. It is not, and never, a title meaning that he should receive any personal worship. Other members that help the master are his chief officers. These are the senior and junior wardens, the secretary and treasurer. Other committees are formed to look after the lodge, to plan social events, and to look after the interest of the brothers and their families when old age and misfortune befall them. Grand. Anything with the title of Grand in this presentation refers to the Grand Lodge of Nebraska. The Grand Lodge of Nebraska was chartered in 1857 And the first Grand Master was a man named Most Worshipful Brother Robert Jordan. I had someone come up to me and say that their grandfather received the Jordan Medal. The Jordan Medal is given out to individual lodge members who are the oldest member of their lodge. So that was touching to hear that someone here had a connection to Robert Jordan. Every lodge in Nebraska is chartered under and is subject to the directives of the Grand Lodge. Service at the Grand Lodge level requires a great deal of travel and personal sacrifice for the good of the craft, particularly for Masons that live in western Nebraska. Each state has its own Grand Lodge, and there is no higher national authority. The Grand Master is in charge of these Masonic activities for a given year and directs the work of the craft. A Grand Custodian is not, in fact, a fancy janitor. The Grand Custodian is more like a superintendent of schools or a dean of a college department. He both teaches and tests the various lodges around the state to ensure that they are doing their degree work correctly and are up to the standard set by the Grand Lodge. The Grand Lodge of Nebraska has met for its annual communication in Kearney many times and has met at the Eunice Center for at least the last 10 years that I could check. Appended bodies. Once a man receives his degrees and becomes a Master Mason in his home lodge, which is sometimes called a Blue Lodge, they may join as many other appended bodies as they wish and their time allows. Each has its own rituals, responsibilities, and a charitable cause. Today, the most public and well-known of these is the Shrine. All Shriners are Masons first, and they raise money for children's hospitals. I will also mention several other organizations. The York and Scottish Rite are similar to attending university or college for Freemasons. They offer more degrees and greater knowledge. If you have heard the terms 32nd degree or 33rd degree, these are achieved in Scottish or York Rite. Part of the York Rite is called the Knights Templar, and they have a military-style uniform, and their charity is to raise money to help the blind. Since Mom bothered to bring it, this is one of those uniforms. This was probably done sometime around 1910, I would guess. You can see the plumed hat and a lot of Masonic symbolism on it. It used to be very popular in Kearney. They were the public-facing part of the lodge in many ways. They marched in parades and went to conclaves that were visited by Masons from all around the country. Over time, the Shrine has kind of taken over this public-facing role. It's been more popular in the modern world. The York Rite's charity and the Knights Templar was raising money for the blind, I may have mentioned. The Scottish Rite is still somewhat popular. They raise money for speech treatments and for the deaf. Our local Scottish Rite Valley, which is based in Hastings, helps raise money for speech pathology centers in Nebraska, including one run through UNK. Shout out to Dr. Schneiderklein. Eastern Star is and was a very important organization in Nebraska. It is open to both Masons and members of Masonic families, often the wives and daughters of Masons. They raise money for the Eastern Star Home for Children in Fremont. The purpose of the Children's Home is to provide quality care for children who have been separated from their homes due to death, divorce, separation, neglect, abuse, or inability to adjust to their present living situation. Free therapy, counseling, and medical care are often combined with programs like 4-H to give children hope and the purpose they need to be successful. The local chapter of Eastern Star is Tuscan Chapter number 35. D-Malay is a Masonic youth organization for boys that are the children or grandchildren of Masons. Job's Daughters is the equivalent youth organization for female relatives of Masons. Many other organizations exist that branch from Masonry, but these have been the most relevant and active locally. Membership has been challenging for several of these organizations as the modern world has moved away from social and service organizations. In many cases, this has been to the detriment of communities these organizations have traditionally served. That's enough, hopefully, to give the unfamiliar something to go on as I explain the history of the local lodge. If you have any questions, I'll happily answer them after the history presentation. If you have any questions about getting involved with Freemasonry locally, you can reach out at beafreemason.org or locally to Worshipful Brother Ron Nielsen, Worshipful Brother Tim Lowe, Worshipful Brother Delmer Jones, Most Worshipful Brother Alex Stratman, Worshipful Brother Liam Killian, or myself. Okay, finally to the history. Some of you folks, if you're familiar with the Kearney downtown and local history, may know several sites where you've seen a cornerstone, or several sites where you think that the Masons have met in the past. Few people know that the local lodge began in Gibbon, which was the original Buffalo County seat. On April 7th, 1871, a train of new immigrants arrived at what was then called Gibbon Siding from Cleveland, Ohio. 30 rail cars had been switched off on the siding to serve as shelter and housing while more permanent dugouts and sod houses were constructed. This was set to become the Soldiers' Free Homestead Colony, a venture led by John Thorpe, a former colonel in the Union Army, and later an agent of the railroad to bring former soldiers and other enterprising men to the area to claim land under the 1862 Homestead Act. Those that came with Colonel Thorpe were vetted for character and temperance. Gibbon Siding greeted them with the scorched earth of a recent prairie fire, and 2 days later, the arrival of an April thunderstorm that then became a blizzard. Later arrivals swelled the number of the colony to 129 families that year. The first records of Gibbon Lodge, later changed to Rock Forest Lodge number 46, come from the year of 1873, and several degrees were conferred that year while they operated under special dispensation. Each degree was a payment of $10, equivalent to about $275 today, and yearly dues were $1.50, or about $40 now. However, they would not have a permanent lodge building to support for decades. The following year, on June 26, 1874, the lodge was officially chartered, and the Gibbon Lodge book lists 10 charter members. These men reflected the colony and the surrounding area. Christopher Putnam, originally from New York State, was a Civil War veteran from the 35th New York Infantry, and had served as one of the early postmen of Buffalo County, county superintendent of schools in 1871, and county surveyor. He served as the first master of Gibbon Lodge in 1873, in the charter year of 1874, and in 1875, when the lodge moved to Kearney. Franklin S. True was the senior warden, and he had served in the 19th Ohio Infantry, and he was the deputy county clerk while the county seat was in Gibbon. Simon Carlton Eyre, originally from New Hampshire, was the first person listed as being raised to the degree of a Master Mason in Gibbon Lodge number 46 on March 5th, 1874. He served as junior warden. Eyre owned a grocery and drugstore in Gibbon and worked for the Union Pacific. He later served as Buffalo County clerk from 1876 to 1879, and the representative to state legislature between 1881 and 1882. Benjamin F. Sammons had served in the 116th Ohio and was the first treasurer. He homesteaded and farmed near Shelton. Alva G.H. White served as the secretary in 1874. He had a dry goods business in Gibbon for many years, but later moved to Houston, Texas. Another notable charter member, here pictured, was Sergeant Michael Cody. Cody had served in the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, and at Fort Kearney during the building of the railroad. He petitioned the governor to create Buffalo County and holds the first land deed recorded in Buffalo County records, which was drawn on April 16th, 1867. He later moved to Omaha, where he was active in Masonic Lodge, Scottish Rite, and the Grand Army of the Republic. Other founders include Roland L. Downing, who was a lumber dealer, flour mill owner, real estate investor. He was one of three brothers, all originally from Vermont, who came to live in Kearney. They and their descendants were active in the lodge. If the Downing name is familiar to folks, the Women's Club house, that was Wallace Downing's home. That was one of the brothers. If anyone's familiar with Kearney Floral, that was George Downing's business. He had a couple other businesses as well, including a laundromat and a coal distribution business. I believe the Downings that are still around are descended from George. So, Albert H. Brundage had been in the 9th Ohio Cavalry. He homesteaded in Nebraska, but eventually returned to Ohio and became a phrenologist. George L. Thomas was a homesteader and carpenter. He lived near Shelton, where he is buried. Lunsford W. Worthington was a farmer and blacksmith, originally from Tennessee. He farmed on the Republican River of northern Kansas, and he is buried in Crestland, Kansas. And he commuted all the way from there to go to Lodge, which shows how much this meant to people. And that was the closest lodge at the time, and probably the closest rail hub. I haven't checked into that, but that's a long way. So, how did we end up in Kearney? The year of 1875 was a tumultuous one for Gibbon Lodge. Kearney had gained the county seat in 1874 and had the advantage of being the new meeting place for the Burlington and the Union Pacific Railroads. Kearney's population was beginning to boom as a result. A petition of the Kearney members was read in January of 1875, and a committee was selected to examine the matter. Several elections were held that year to move the location of the lodge, with the Kearney faction finally being victorious at the May 15th meeting. A petition was sent to the Grand Lodge of Nebraska to move the location of the lodge to Kearney. The first Kearney meeting took place at Fraternity Hall on June 11th, 1875, as a special communication. On August 18th, 1875, it was agreed between the lodge and Enoch B. Carter that the lodge would pay Brother Carter a quarterly rent of $7.50 for the use of the hall. Kearney would continue to boom as a center of trade and manufacturing from 1874 to 1893, during what is sometimes called America's Gilded Age. Several men had massive impacts on the early years of the lodge. Dr. Rob Morris was a Masonic scholar and poet of great renown. He had served as the Grand Master of Kentucky and was the founder of the Order of the Eastern Star, which we've already talked about. He had written several books and collections of poems, and was attempting to raise money for the creation of new lodges in the Holy Land, bringing him to Nebraska in 1869 and 1876 on speaking tours. He visited Kearney on February 10th, 1876, and must have made an impression. He gave a short lecture, recited some of his poems, and then conferred several Eastern Star degrees. The brothers purchased copies of his poetry and research in the Holy Land, some of which is pictured there. One of the brothers in the lodge left that same book to the lodge. I just found a copy where the cover was a bit clearer, and it's got a collection of his poetry. It seems that he was trying to basically unite the world in a common purpose. The idea was that most major religions share some tenets. He thought that Freemasonry could be kind of a bridge to bringing peace to the Holy Land, which even then was a dream. And if he had been more successful, who knows? But eventually that lodge, sadly, did close. Later, a banquet was held at the Kearney Commercial House for Rob Morris before he left. The bylaws of the lodge were amended the following year to name the lodge after him. Henry Gibbons is the first name that appears signing our bylaws. Henry was born in County Westmeath, Ireland, but his parents were of English descent. He joined St. John's Lodge number 891 in Inniskillen, Ireland in 1863. He then immigrated to the United States and found work as a railroad agent, living first in Lincoln, Nebraska, and later moving to Kearney in 1876. As the agent for Kearney, he oversaw all activities at the Union Pacific Depot, as well as the connected Western Union Telegraph Company. He and a newly arrived nephew named John G. Lowe managed Kearney's first telephone company in connection with the telegraph lines. He was a charter member of the vestry at St. Luke's Episcopal Church and later became Kearney's postmaster. He was the master of Rob Morris Lodge between 1879 and 1881 and the Grand Master of Nebraska Masons in 1912. Some local connections. He also had a brother who was named J.P. Gibbons, who ran the grain elevator here in town for many years, as well as a couple other grain elevators in central Nebraska. His son, Dr. Charles Kimball Gibbons, was probably the first person to be born in Kearney and returned here to practice medicine. So, first born and bred doctor. And obviously there's a family connection with me. I believe I've figured out he was my 4 times great uncle. So, and my granddad still had the middle name Gibbons, which I was always curious about as a kid, so there's the answer. This is another picture of him. This is the groundbreaking ceremony in Omaha for the Omaha Scottish Rite Center. That building still stands. It's in downtown Omaha. It's a very impressive building. And if I had to zoom in, that's him there, just to get something where you could see him. But that crowd of Masons extends quite a distance. There were several thousand there, which it was probably a very cool ceremony. One thing I figured out with Henry, as a boy, he probably would have, seen and experienced the horrors of the Irish famine. By the end of his life, he had seen the advent of the airplane, which, that's kind of unbelievable. Robert Emmett French was born in 1849 in Ohio and became one of Kearney's blacksmiths. So relevant for the blacksmith shop here. He owned a shop that did carriage and wagon repairs for the growing town. He was the master of Rob Morris in 1885 and 86 and Grand Master of Nebraska in 1891. Uncle Bob, as the brethren called him, became the Grand Custodian in 1901. And he served in that post until his death in 1927. He traveled constantly, taking him to every lodge in the state. When he died, he was so widely known that nearly every paper in Nebraska ran his obituary. All of these are individual. Almost all of these were probably contributed by lodge secretaries along with local reporting. Very few of them match, which means he made an impact on every community in Nebraska just about, which is pretty cool. So where were we staying? It seems like until 1881 when I pick it up, there were a number of different locations, including possibly renting out the Oddfellows Hall, and it was probably kind of a moving thing. Month to month, they may have agreed on different locations. It was the early days, and Kearney was just getting going. I pick it up at the regular meeting on July 6th, 1881, where a resolution was adopted that the principal officers of the lodge acquire all stock of the Mutual Building Association, and that building be acquired for the exclusive use of the lodge. At the August 3rd, 1881 communication, a bill for $530 was allowed for the purchase of the building. That's not this building. That would have been a frame building that was somewhere downtown and has since definitely been demolished. This would have been about $17,000 today. This would not have been an impressive structure. It was clearly a temporary thing until we could get something else going. From 1890 to 1912, the Masonic bodies leased the 3rd floor of the First National Bank building, or Robertson Block. This building still stands and is now called the Henline Building. And you'll recognize it there. It's got a clothing boutique on the bottom and on the frontage, and I believe the Palm Garden on the side. We may laugh about that now, but you clearly realize that's a major community investment, and that's an impressive building at the time. 3 stories in brick and a large facade. I had trouble finding information on the building for a minute. It's like they had to have done a story in the local paper about this thing getting built. It's huge. And then I discovered the copy of the hub that they still have in records has a lovely tear in it, and I spliced it and managed to kind of figure out what it probably said. That's the copy of the article right there. It's a very interesting article. It runs much longer than that, and it's kind of an interesting time capsule of that particular building and part of the community. And that's what it looked like at the time. You can see Robertson on the facade instead of Henline. You can see the unbricked windows, and you can see First National Bank right there. In addition, just to continue with the nepotistic theme, I discovered that it's the first account of my twice-great-granddad getting a bank job. And that was really, really cool when it runs through all the different officers of the bank. So, that was pretty neat. In September of 1912, after decades of speculation, the Masonic Temple Association was... Sorry, I'm at the wrong spot. Sorry, ambitions existed to create a more permanent temple that the lodge would own, or the Temple Association would own. On October 12, 1887, the first Temple Craft Association was formed with the purpose of building a permanent Masonic temple. Its members were Charles B. Finch, who was former mayor of Kearney and owner of the Empire Store along with his brother, Homer J. Allen of Allen and Barney, and J.D. Hawthorne of Hawthorne's Jewelry. And Steen's here, so he could tell us all about how long that's been running. By 1890, the lodge had purchased land on the corner of Central Avenue and 23rd Street, and had raised $42,100 in capital for the construction of a Masonic temple. Then, nothing seems to have happened. Meetings of the Temple Craft Association only continued until 1893, which yields a clue. The Panic of 1893 led to record unemployment and business failures, particularly in the western states. This was compounded by drought and crop failures from 1893 to 1895, and rail disruptions, like the bankruptcy of Union Pacific in 1893, and the Pullman strike in 1894. The Kearney real estate bubble created by investors like George W. Frank collapsed. Businesses and banks failed en masse. Of the 7 banks in Kearney, 6 failed. The exception was the newest, which was the Farmers Bank, organized in 1890, later called Farmers State Bank. The Temple Crafts capital would have been lost, along with the rest of the towns. Kearney's population had been conservatively estimated at 10,000 people in 1892. By 1900, the census counted only 5,634 people. The last blow fell when the cotton mill closed permanently in 1901. Recovery would only begin when the city was awarded with the state normal school in 1903. In 1904, construction began on the new state normal school. On a rainy day in October of 1904, the cornerstone was laid by the Grand Lodge with the help of the brothers of Rob Morris. This school would become Kearney State Teachers College, and later, today is known as the University of Nebraska at Kearney. The outside investment gave Kearney hope. New businesses opened and the population began to grow again. In 1915, a ceremony was held by the Grand Lodge of Nebraska, together with the brothers of Rob Morris Lodge number 46, to lay the cornerstone at the new Kearney State Normal School auditorium, this time to better weather and fanfare. These buildings were later demolished, but many other cornerstones still exist on campus. You can see them all there. I recently found out of another connection at UNK. The business department at UNK, its ancestor would be the State Normal School Commercial Department. The founder of that was a guy named Clarence Albert Murch, and he also has served as a past master of Rob Morris Lodge, which that was another neat connection to find. Another school, the Kearney Military Academy, had a cornerstone ceremony on December 18th, 1906 for their new Cochran Hall building. The Kearney Midway Military Band, the Knights Templar of Mount Hebron Commandery, and the members of Rob Morris Lodge number 46 marched leading a procession of cars that contained the officers of the Grand Lodge and other dignitaries. A member of the lodge and former mayor of Kearney, Charles B. Finch, rode with the order for the event. William Jennings Bryan spoke that day of man as a threefold being. He said that proper education should train men mentally, physically, and morally. The Cochran Hall building later became St. Luke's Hospital, a nursing home, and a daycare before it was finally condemned. The building was eventually demolished in 2011. There's a lovely picture there. It's run in the paper several times. I do wish they would include the Masonic context of the event when they run that picture. So if anybody's got any pull with the hub or locally, that would be great. William Jennings Bryan was a prominent Freemason, and he was there in that context that day. So probably the most famous Nebraska Mason. In September of 1912, after decades of speculation, the Masonic Temple Association was reorganized. Its new members were Frederick J. Switz, who owned a furniture store downtown, Henry A. Webert, Walter W. Barney, John G. Lowe Sr., and Wyman S. Clapp. Frederick J. Switz had immigrated from Germany and had served in the 42nd Ohio Infantry during the Civil War. I mentioned the furniture store he had. Henry A. Webert owned a print shop in the Opera House and was Kearney City Treasurer for over 20 years. Walter W. Barney did real estate abstracts, or titles as they're now called, and was a partner in the firm Allen and Barney. His family followed him into the business, which later became W. W. Barney and Sons. His sons and grandsons were active in the lodge. John G. Lowe Sr., let's get to some pictures. John G. Lowe Sr. was the nephew of Henry Gibbon and got his start with the Union Pacific as a telegraph operator, as Mom mentioned. He was the president of Farmers State Bank for over 30 years. Wyman S. Clapp had a large insurance business and had served as the president of the Kearney City Council. These brothers seem to have applied a stronger grip to the project, and the first permanent Masonic temple's construction was announced 12 days later in the Kearney, Nebraska Daily News. The location of the temple was attached to the Hibbert Building at the corner of 23rd Street and Central Avenue. The Hibbert Building was still under construction at this time, and the same workers and materials were used. It was billed as having a modern and handsome pressed brick construction. The temple was completed before the new year and immediately had two tenants, the Gaston Music Company on the ground floor and a vacuum shop in the basement. The hub noted that it was gratifying to know, even at this late date in the city's history, that a permanent Masonic temple had been built. The building still exists and is sometimes known as the Hibbert Block, although oftentimes you'll hear it referred to as Nesto Space or the Temple Lofts now. And there it is. It's recently been kind of refinished a little bit. Masonic organizations continued to grow, and on December 3rd, 1921, Kearney added a chapter of the Order of the D. Malay. In July of 1927, after only 15 years of use, the Temple building was sold to Charles Gaston of the Gaston Music Company for $30,000. So we sold it to the tenant. Why'd we do that? We'll get to that. Back in the roaring 20s, the 20s were in full swing. Times were good, but not for some of the folks in Kearney. The Fort Kearney Hotel project had been uncompleted for 7 years. The North American Hotel Construction Company had been mired in legal trouble, and the project had stalled. Finally, on February 16th, 1926, the Nebraska Supreme Court broke the deadlock, and the project was to be sold and finished. The completion of the hotel meant a number of things. First, stylish and modern and convenient accommodations would be available downtown for any visiting brethren. Additionally, the land near the hotel would become prime real estate. Lastly, a large number of workers and building materials were about to become available. The Masonic Temple Association membership seems to have been a life sentence in these days as well, and it was still comprised of Henry A. Webert, John G. Lowe, and Wyman S. Clapp. These men acted quickly. 2 adjoining lots were purchased on the corner of 24th Street and Central Avenue from E.A. Eck and Ian Porterfield for the purpose of building a stately and superb structure. The project was announced in the Hub on February 19th, 1926, with a full front page spread. The projected temple was described thusly. Tentative plans call for the erection of a 4-story building of pressed brick, stone, concrete, and steel construction, modern in every detail. The building is to extend over the entire footage acquired. Elevator service will be installed in the construction throughout, and every convenience of the tenant and his patrons will be given consideration. At the time of the announcement, it was already said that more applications have been recorded for office rooms than are available. The World Theater, we'll go to that. The World Theater was announced as a permanent tenant. Final details of the building were overseen by a building committee composed of Henry A. Webert, Wyman S. Clapp, George O. Fairchild, and Salmon H. Burroughs. James T. Allen of Omaha was selected as the architect, and Henry Knutson was the primary contractor. Good weather allowed construction to proceed quickly in 1927, and shows began at the World Theater on November 14th of 1927. On January 2nd, 1928, the first Masonic functions began to meet as the lodge room had been completed, although the furniture had not yet been installed. The temple was still very positively described by the paper as considerably larger than the one at Grand Island. In 1939, Rob Morris hosted 200 Masons, including the Grand Lodge, for a cornerstone ceremony at the new City Hall and a banquet afterwards at the Midway Hotel. During World War II, the brothers of Rob Morris provided degree work for the soldiers, sailors, and airmen who were soon to be deployed, including the airmen at the Kearney Army Airfield. In 1960, Rob Morris Lodge was again honored to have a Grand Master from Kearney, Joseph C. Tye. Tye was a prominent attorney from the firm Tye, Warlock, and Knapp, and had been the mayor of Kearney. He was the first attorney from Kearney to serve as president of the Nebraska State Bar Association. On December 6, 1962, the mortgage for the temple was finally paid off and burned in celebration. This is just kind of a time capsule from that era. It shows some of the local Masons at that time. It's a particularly good photo. I mostly included it because when we did the 150th, there were, I think, 3 grandsons of people in the photo that attended, so I wanted to include this for them. And there they all are. And in the back row somewhere, there's a very young grandpa of Dr. Nathan Ty, which is kind of neat. Tom Ty Sr. And, well, Joe Ty Center and Tom Ty Sr. in the upper.
And John Haberly in the front.
Yeah, I should mention that your husband. Well, let's see.
Right in the back.
Oh, there.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. I see it.
it's weird seeing him with hair.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alfred B. Somm was a rural letter carrier who was very active in every form of Masonic life. He became Grand Master of Nebraska in 1978. Thomas W. Ty was a prominent attorney of the Ty law firm. He was the second Ty to be a Grand Master of Nebraska in 1990. A resolution was passed on February 3rd, 1990 that extended fraternal recognition to the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, Free and Accepted Masons of Nebraska. So if you've ever heard of traditionally black colleges, Prince Hall lodges are traditionally black lodges. So that'd be the kind of parallel I would draw there. In more recent history, Delmer Jones has served as the master of Rob Morris Lodge number 46 in 1983 and 2014. He's been the secretary of the lodge for many years, and he was deputy grand custodian and the grand custodian of Nebraska from 2019 to 2021. Ron Nielsen was master of the lodge in 2008 and is master again this year. He was the Grand Marshal of Nebraska in 2024, but he still tries, and even when he's doing stuff at the Grand Lodge level or for the Shrine in Hastings, he tries to keep the brothers of Rob Morris involved. Timothy E. Lowe was master of the lodge in 1993. He, like his great-grandfather, is also on the Masonic Temple Association, probably for life, and takes care of the lodge, even though he wouldn't ever take credit for it. Most worshipful brother Alex Stratman is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve's legal operations and is the chief compliance officer at UNK. He served as Grand Master in 2022 and helped extend Masonic recognition to several groups, including the Grottos. Years pass, but the attentive ear still receives the sound from the instructive tongue, and the mysteries of Freemasonry are safely lodged in the repository of faithful hearts. Hopeful times greet the brethren as the lodge turned 150 in 2024. So, here's some common misconceptions I ran into while I was doing the history for the lodge. I heard multiple people say that Rob Morris was from Virginia. That's false. He was born in New York State, lived in Massachusetts, Mississippi, and was mostly known for living in Kentucky. Later on in life, he was mostly involved in speaking engagements and writing poetry. He became very popular for that. As a younger man, he was kind of a bygone age when in the South there wasn't a lot of public education. So traveling tutors would come through and educate the sons of the wealthy, and that's kind of what he did as a job early on and why he moved to so many different places. But he was Grand Master of Kentucky, and that's where he died. Recently, Worship Brother Steen Kendall discovered in Hawthorne's records, because J.D. Hawthorne was a secretary for the lodge, a telegraph that was sent when Rob Morris died in LaGrange, Kentucky. And we had sent that to him and expressed our sorrow that he had passed. And that was really neat to see. I'd heard that no master of the lodge had served multiple years until recently. That was false. It's printed on the programs that we have every year at installation. That was immediately apparent. Rob Morris died on his way home from visiting Nebraska. That was false. He was of delicate health and kind of, was an intellectual, so he could kind of continue on. The brothers were really inspired that he was putting up with his poor health and was traveling all around the country to spread the message anyway. So that's one of the reasons we named the lodge after him. But he did not die on the way home. He lived for 12 years past his visit. And there's some sources. Any questions?
Nate, are there other lodges named after Rob Morris?
Around the country. I think there is one. I do not know it off the top of my head. But I'm sure there are several Eastern Star things named after him just because he was one of the founders. Yeah.
Are your notes gonna be, written up in some form for the Buffalo County Historical Society?
I could submit them if
I think
I'm
that
asked.
would be nice for people to be able to go back and read it.
Yeah. I could do that. Well, first Dad was concerned that I wouldn't fit stuff in, and now he's concerned that it's too long, so can't please everybody.
We're gonna see about getting it in the Buffalo Tales.
Okay.
The whole thing?
Not the whole.
I would have to take one part of it. Yeah. Sorry if I went a little long.
It was on record somewhere, so people can come in.
But he did come visit with Lena and got, what was the book that you?
The Gibbon Lodge Secretary's book, which contained entries going from 1872 and 73 onward until the lodge moved to Kearney, had some early entries regarding different charges that the lodge had, would give some information on that early Gibbon community. So we donated, we let them scan that so that they could have that information, because that's fine. Any other questions?
Nate,
Mary?
thank you very, very much. This is enlightening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, next month, February 13th, it's, we're always, Fabulous Fridays is always on the second Friday of each month. But it's next month is Dr. Will Stoudemeyer, and he will tell the story of Eliza Galloway. And she was, help me out, she was the maid at the Frank House, right? Okay. Yeah, but please join us again next month. If you didn't get a copy of this with the listing of Fabulous Fridays, we've been doing this since 2011, a long time, forever. And so we'll continue next month. Thank you so much for being here.